honestly, be sure you're ready to run a website.
Listen, did you know I've been working on this episode of the podcast since October last year? Well, now you do. To cut a long story short, I've had some issues being too particular about what I've been trying to do with the podcasts. I had a great vision, a great plan, and I've been working towards it. I actually recorded the segment you're going to listen to or see today, depending how you're tuning in. This was recorded in November 2023. And I'm now recording this next part in September 2024. I've been overly precious with my format, and Andy from episode 1, he did a podcast recently talking about getting guests on podcasts, and I made a passing comment. He replied, I sent him a screenshot on WhatsApp and was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, if you aren't publishing, you don't have a podcast. So yeah, that's where we came from. So I've sat in this content for nearly a year. I think it's really great content. My guest today is Mr. Jake Woods, who you'll have seen during the introduction. I had the pleasure working with Jake at an agency we used to work at together. We started working together literally on the cusp of COVID. I think Jake started with the company 3 days before lockdown happened. And at the time, the e-commerce sector, the business we were working at, exploded. And Jake and I were powering our way through e-commerce websites. And along the way, we discovered some fascinating things about how people think, how businesses think, how to improve things. And I discovered Jake has a fantastic way of creating navigation systems, which is why he was asked to be on the podcast today, because I was trying to steal it. I didn't get hold of it. I'm joking. I wouldn't steal it. If I was going to steal it, I would have stole it a long time ago. Jake knows I'm joking, hopefully. But no, Jake has some great insights. We talk about empathetic design. We talk about MIT. And we just talk about the thought process of getting behind your user. I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I am going to let you enjoy the content, and I'll speak to you again after. Jake, welcome to Sell More Stuff, an e-commerce podcast. Great to have you.
Hey, how's it going?
Not so bad. So for those who don't know who Jake is a freelance web developer who typically specializes in WordPress. But when Jake and myself worked in-house at an agency, the first encounter I had of Jake was one day prior to the whole world going into lockdown. Was it one day?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So I think I started on the Monday. Monday was the 23rd of March, and the very next day, the 24th, I think it was, the world went into lockdown, or the UK went into lockdown. And yeah, it was a warm welcome to a new job. I just moved home from England at that point, and looking to start a new life over here with my partner. And yeah, so not the best introduction to life back at home, but sure, like the rest of the planet, we made it work.
That's it. Jake and I were chucked in the room because at the time, all of the clients and the agency who had been brick and mortar stores previously, it was like, we need to start selling online before the world goes into lockdown. And at the time, I was the only person that knew reasonably well how to build e-commerce websites. And I just got thrust in the room. This is Jake. Show him everything you can about Shopify in the next 4 hours before we have to go home. And we did. We sat down and we talked about as much as I could think to talk about Shopify, the ins and outs, how to use it, blah blah blah. And Jake, being an experienced in development, obviously knew the nuances of UX and UI and stuff like that there. So we made it work, and I would say we were rattling off 2, maybe 3 e-commerce websites a week during the first few weeks of lockdown.
I mean, it was an amazing time to get into e-commerce because, like you say, a lot of businesses that maybe were more traditional brick and mortar, all of a sudden the only kind of channel they had, the only avenue they had to sell on was online. So we faced this problem where I didn't actually know Shopify before I started working with John at the previous agency. So my first experience with Shopify was sat in a meeting room across the table because of social distancing and all of that. And he honestly showed me how to do one Shopify site, and we just had to take it from there and run and almost figure it out as we went along. I mean, I'm a developer, but I never really worked in ecom as such before, so it was a heck of a way to to get to grips with an entire new way of thinking. And it was amazing. You know, it was, looking back on it, it was challenging in terms of workload and challenging in terms of figuring stuff out very quickly, because you had people's businesses in your hands at that point, essentially. If we couldn't get their ecom sites going, they couldn't make money. So it was, the weight of responsibility was, it felt pretty huge at the time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it was exactly that. Because we had people, we had done a Shopify site before you joined, where the customer had it for about 6 months, and they weren't really sending people to their website because their brick and mortar store was fine. And then they'd ignored their website for months, and then lockdown hit, and they were like, "Oh, that we need to update this. How do we do this?" And like, I can't remember if it was yourself or me or potentially one of the other guys that just showed them kind of like the basics again. And they, within like a week of us showing them what to do, they were back earning all via their Shopify store at the time what they were doing in the bricks and mortar shop. And I think that, I don't know about the rest of the world, but Northern Ireland in some instances can be a bit questionable when it comes to e-commerce. Some people don't see the value in having additional online sales, and that's really because the shop's doing really well. And if you have your revenue stream coming in and everything's going well, sometimes don't upset the apple cart. It makes sense, especially if you're not that way inclined, because it's not for everyone. I think Colin Christie in my last podcast, whenever I asked him if he had one piece of advice, his one piece of advice is make sure people are willing to buy what you're trying to sell. So it's just that, just because it works for brick and mortar shop doesn't mean it'll work online.
Absolutely. That was a major challenge, I think, at that point, because all of a sudden, so in previous roles, when I've dealt with clients or stakeholders or whatever, very often these are people that are interested in running a website. They've maybe done a bit of research by themselves. They might not have the chops yet, they might not have the knowledge yet, but they know this is what they want to do. They want to start a blog, or they want to sell something online, or they want to create like a kind of brochure site for their company. All of a sudden we were dealing with people who frankly had no intention of running a website, hadn't really been able to put any time or thought into it. It was almost like there was a to be a bit kind of crude, there was a gun at the back of their head. I mean, they had to all of a sudden run a website. So that in itself actually brought its own challenges, because we were in a position where you're not only trying to build a functional, fit for purpose website, you're also trying to educate the person whose long-term responsibility is going to use that website and make it work. So it was a challenge on two fronts almost at that point, aside from the workload and everything. So yeah.
And that brings us to kind of the topic of the day. So today's podcast is all about things to get right during the build. And one of the things that fascinated me about you, and you've kept it from me ever since, is you have a very, very particular way of doing things when it comes to like navigation and filters. So anyone just setting up an e-commerce website, I recommend you deep dive into your filters and your chain of thought and how people browse your products. The way I put it to a customer of ours at the time, they'd lumped pretty much everything into 2 or 3 categories, and there was different sizes, different colors, and all the rest of it. And the way I put it to them is, when someone walks into your shop, they don't come in and say, for example, if we're talking about phones, you don't walk into a phone shop and say, "I want a phone." You walk in and you say, "Oh, I'm looking for the latest iPhone. I need a lot of memory because I do a lot of video." You give the shopkeeper something to work with. Whereas a lot of, whenever you start, most shops, none of those options happen by default. So it was really, some of the people, when they were just getting started, they didn't really think that kind of stuff through. And I think it's one of the pivotal things when you're setting up a website, you're adding new products to get right. And I seen your spreadsheet once, and I was fascinated, and I meant to take more of a mental note at the time, but we were that busy I didn't.
Yeah.
and that the spreadsheet still haunts my dreams sometimes at night. It's fascination. So tell us a bit more about your process for navigation and fillers.
Well, so before I realistically, when I'm building an e-commerce site, before I write a line of code, before I realistically even think about design, before I think about content, I think about the product structure. So John has alluded to, I have a spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet has served me very well. It's fairly low tech. It doesn't do anything fancy, but what it does allow me and the stakeholder and I to do is to basically look at their site from a high level before they do anything. Don't worry about what color the button's going to be. Don't worry about what font you're using for your headings. Worry about how is someone going to arrive on my homepage, and how are they going to get from point A to B, point B being conversion, as quickly as possible. To do that, they have to be able to find what they want quickly and easily. And that's where kind of navigation, first of all, categorization comes into place. So, I kind of try to put myself in, if there's an absence of data, if I'm working on the new e-com store and there's no data to work with, if I can't see previous user behavior, you have to almost put yourself in the user's shoes. Now, the good news is that there's a lot of great examples out there. And I have a saying, so I was a musician before I was a developer, and there's a saying in the music industry that good artists borrow, but great artists steal. So what I would tend to do is I would go and look at, so say I'm working on an urban streetwear brand, for example, or just say a clothes brand. Let's go more general, more vague. I would find examples of companies that are doing it extremely well. And they're usually the big dogs. It's usually ASOS, Next, and I would go and look at how they're doing it. Obviously, this is assuming that the target market is going to be similar and we have no data to work with. So I would go and I would just honestly look at what they're doing, learn what I can from it, and look at multiple sources too, because you don't want to just go to one place and go, that's how it's done. You probably want to go to maybe 5, 6, 10 places and look, and what's common, what are the common. So for example, I worked on an e-com store last year, and they were a kind of fitness, local fitness brand. Awesome stuff, great product, great guys, really, really, really ambitious people. And I noticed that on their current site, they didn't split out by gender, for example. And this was something I noticed was really common in, across the board, like Nike, everybody does it. So that was the very first place I started. And don't get me wrong, fitness products, I mean, a lot of their stuff can be worn by men or women. So a lot of the products will fit in the same category. But what I was trying to do was kind of smooth that path to conversion. And I was trying to make it so that, if I'm someone who identifies as female and I land on their site, or if someone identifies as male, I instantly know where to go to get started. It's that first step, because websites can be daunting, and the way e-commerce sites in particular, they're quite full on. In terms of you land, you tend to have a hero. You maybe have like your, best sellers below. Think Amazon. Like Amazon is actually an overwhelming website. When you land on Amazon, it's boom, it's there, it's in your face. It's intense. So we kind of thought, right, how do I kind of solve that overwhelm initially? And that starts with kind of your higher level product categories. In this case, it was, men, women, and I actually went everyone because it's 2020. Well, it's 2022 at that point, but it's 2023, and the world is a fairer and more equal place. So, and I kind of thought there are people who don't identify as men or women, so I went for everyone. And again, same products probably in all three overarching sections, but again, it just gives someone somewhere to start, and it gives it in their language they will understand too. Do you know what I mean? And then from there, you delve down another layer, and you kind of go, right, so what would I want? So I know I'm, identify as male, click on the male header, perfect, drop down. So right, what do I need after that? And it's almost like, I learned this phrase really recently, and Airbnb kind of pioneered it, not ecom, but Airbnb kind of pioneered it, and it's empathetic design. And I love it, set my brain on fire, because I think as developers and designers, we have our own problems. My set of problems to solve as a developer is extremely different from the set of problems that someone who's going to be using the websites I build has. Yeah. So I thought, so I love this idea of empathetic design, as in you try to design with empathy with your end user in mind. Absolutely love it. So coming back to the site I built. So then my next question was, right, I know, I've chosen the male dropdown. And then what do I need? Okay, well, I need some running shorts, for example. So there'll be a category for running shorts. I need, hoodies. And then what that allows you to do is drill down into the products. Once you click one of those options, you'll end up on, what Shopify would call a collection page, with all of the products within that collection in there. And that's where then your kind of finer filters come in. And I feel like that's where it gets a bit more specific to the company that you're dealing with, because you have to take into account their fits, their colors, their sizing. There's no one size fits all solution at that point. You're almost realistically, I mean, it could be configured in a way, I guess, that it almost kind of happens automatically based on the stock on hand and stuff. And Shopify is very, very, very good at that. But I feel like at that point, that is almost more, you probably never get the same set of filters twice, even across websites within the same niche.
I think it's important as well when we're talking about filters and stuff. One issue I see a lot of people have is consistency. So
Yes.
a lot of websites, it is literally, and I've seen people like Argos and all the rest that get this wrong, where you'll be filtering by color and someone will have typed red, small R-E-D, and some will capitalize the R. So you will have red and red. And then that appears as two different filters. And in clothing, particularly, just because you're using a clothing example, you'll see people who have S and people who have small in the same. So, your what should be in theory, depending how up and down you're going in terms of size. And you could have anything from, in theory, 8 suddenly becomes like 14 because they've doubled up and stuff like that there. And it's just it's a bit of bad user experience. And I know a lot of the people I would talk to at the time say the reason they did that when they're adding the products to the website is they go by what's on the label. So some brands will call their clothes small, some will call it S. And it's just an easy thing to do, but just with the end user in mind, empathetic design, we do exactly that. And it's actually an interesting point. Jake and I were just at a talk last night, and the speaker had been talking to one of the people from MIT, big technology, best technology in the world kind of thing, university. And he'd been talking about the fact that they recruit their students from all over the world, from different places, and they set up little research hubs across the world. And the question he asked them is why. And he said that their researchers generally work in the silo, and they are dedicated to their craft, but they are not out there in the world trying to, they're not experiencing the problems that they're trying to solve, and that's why they recruit people from all over the world. It leads into that idea of empathetic design. They are empathetically designing how their researchers behave by introducing people with the problems to the people dealing with the research. So it's definitely something to think about and very just relevant to what we listened to last night. Jake and I had our minds kind of melded a bit last night by the talk. It was a great talk, and hopefully it will lead to great things for e-commerce in particular.
Absolutely.
Head thinking.
I honestly, I had trouble sleeping after. So we went to, it was a talk by, I've forgotten Vincent's surname. Maybe you can help me with that. Vincent Lusby from Invest NI. And honestly, if you ever get a chance to listen to that man speak, he is, I struggled to get to sleep last night because my mind was just worrying. John was laughing at me when I came out of the talk. I was just, I could barely speak, could I? I couldn't get thoughts in order to speak. And that continued into when I went home. I basically came home and ranted at my partner Emily like a madman, just by all of the amazing things I'd heard. It was awesome. Little tangent there. I'm very sorry. I love a sidetrack, by the way. So
you're fine. It's but it's one of those things. It's like we all learn from people who are passionate about their craft, and that's part of the reason why I do the podcast. And one of the reasons Jake had messaged me. I hope he doesn't mention it. He sent to me before we come on podcast. It was like, I don't know what I have to contribute. And I was like, well, what you have to contribute is you have a particular set of skills that other people don't have. That's important to what they're doing, and that's what you're here to share. And fun enough, once you got talking, there's no issues.
Well, that's fair. That's true.
It's about giving people a platform to talk about what they experienced and know, I also love how you say you used to be into music, whenever in reality you are still very much into music. This is
It's
the
very much a
opportunity
passion project.
to plug the band. Go for it.
So I play in a band called North Coast now, which is kind of silly pop punk, like early 2000s pop punk. But can I just point out as well, you make me sound like Liam Neeson from Taken. I have a very particular set of skills.
Well, you do. And who doesn't love Liam Neeson?
Hey man, he's truly the best of us.
So what? Just last couple of questions, and we can sign off for a bit. So next question would be, what else? So we've talked about the filtrations, navigation. What else to you, as a developer or as a browser of e-commerce sites, what do you think is important? What, whenever you go to buy something, what is it for you?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, how long do we have? But realistically, I think so I don't get to work on a lot of e-com stores anymore. So I guess I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of someone who is building primarily WordPress, content-based WordPress sites. So I think we have to go the very, very basic. So your site has to load quickly. Your site has to be accessible for everybody. Your site has to be well optimized in terms of content and in terms of code quality. Again, that falls into kind of like page speed and things like that. So realistically, I think that, I guess this is the non-ecom portion of the top, so to speak. I would say that these are things that are true whether you're selling shoes, you're selling Nike trainers, or whether you're selling a law firm, essentially. So so to start, I mean, what was my first example? I've just forgotten. Was it accessibility?
Page load speeds and stuff like that there.
Okay,
page load speeds and accessibility,
Yeah, absolutely. So to frame it from an ecom perspective, there is some stats from some research published by Google. I think a couple of years old at this point. Landscape might have changed slightly, but I'm certain the central principle holds true. Something like an extra 1 second of loading time on a website will lead to a 7% drop in conversions. So if you think in your e-com store, if you're selling £100,000 worth of stuff a year, if your site is taking 1 second longer to load, you're losing £7,000 on that, which is, it's a significant chunk of change to anybody. There's also, I believe, an expectation. I think 40% of users expect a website to load within 2 seconds. So 2 seconds is your benchmark. That's where you really want to be coming in under. Google Lighthouse will actually flag, and this is getting a bit nerdy now. John, stop me if this is too much. But Google Lighthouse will actually flag if your largest contentful paint is more than 2 seconds, because it's kind of accepted in this day and age that a site shouldn't be taking that long to load. Something like of those 40% of people that expect it to load within 2 seconds, something like 47% of those people will bounce from the site if it takes longer than 3 seconds. So if your benchmark is 2 seconds and a significant proportion of people are leaving if it takes longer than 3 seconds, that second really matters. And then it's diminishing returns after that. So if you're talking 3 seconds, so what is it, 22% of all users or something are going to bounce. Every second after that, you're just hemorrhaging users at that point. So if your site's taking 8 and 9 seconds to load, if you get 1,000 people on your site, you're maybe only, and these numbers are, this isn't backed by science, this is just anecdotal. If your site's taking 8 and 9 seconds to load, you've got a tiny percentage of your users actually sticking around to then use the navigation, to then use your amazing content structure that you've spent days of your life planning, So I do think that I do think that that's really key to, I think my second point was then accessibility, and how your website has to be usable by everybody. And again, it's just, even from outside of a fairness to people with certain disabilities, it's just good sense to have your site as usable by everybody as possible. No one can afford to turn people away. You know, or the economy, it's brutal out there. It's a jungle out there in the world, and you can't say no to people. You can't turn people away before they've even got started. You know, you can't turn anyone away if they're wanting to spend money. You have to be able to welcome them into your site, have it be usable, have it be functional. And further to that, from an SEO point of view, Google penalizes sites that aren't accessible now. So not only does it make sense from a fairness and equality point of view, it makes sense from a technical aspect. It makes sense from an SEO aspect. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Very good. And we're running out of time. So one final question for you, Jake, and that would be, what piece of advice would you give someone looking to start an e-commerce store?
Ooh. Okay, I wasn't ready for this one. What piece of advice?
What's the number one challenge you encounter from your end?
I would say, honestly, be sure you're ready to run a website. As in, I don't mean like be an expert before you get started, but make sure you're willing to. Websites are annoying. You know, they're buggy. They take up time. It's hard to get right, but just make sure you're ready to keep it constantly updated. Make sure you're ready to consider your website fully as a part of your business. I mean, realistically, a website is a salesperson. It doesn't need bricks, right? You know, your website can be selling at 3 a.m. in Panama whenever you're asleep in Northern Ireland. So you have to give it, like, not to respect's the wrong word, but you certainly have to give it the place and the importance within your business that it deserves. I think we've had clients that it happens very frequently. Clients get a brand new site and it's their number one priority for the first month, and then they realize, wait a minute, this isn't maybe doing what I thought it was going to do, or it started a bit slower. How do I drive traffic? And because they maybe don't understand that, they get bored of it and the site just kind of sits and neglects, and eventually things get out of date. It feels so if you plan, and this is from someone that starts, but if you plan to make a website, make sure you have the time to maintain it and give it the respect and the time that it deserves in your business, you know.
Very good. Look, Jack, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Speak to you again soon.
All the very best.
Some great insights there from Jake about running an e-commerce website. And as he said, if you want to run an e-commerce website, be committed to running an e-commerce website. It is your 24-hour-a-day salesperson, especially if you look after it right, but be willing to make the commitment to looking after it. Otherwise, it's not going to do as well as you want it to. We are going to be flying through a bit more content in the coming period of time. The big change I made to the podcast so we can start getting episodes out is, at least temporarily, I'm dropping the 2-speaker format because I have been unable to get a speaker to commit for a second period for a couple pieces. Had people lined up, people dropped out. It happens. Look, everyone has a life to live. So 1 speaker, 1 guest format until we can get back on track. And to show the commitment I've actually started recording Series 2, but we're going to power through the rest of Series 1 first. And you shall hear more from us again soon. Good luck and speak soon.